In this video, we'll compare three popular radar detectors on some challenging country roads. We've got the Escort Max 360 Mark II, the Uniden R8, and the Cobra Rad 700i. I'm also going to add my old Escort Solo S3 into the mix, which I've been using for about 12 years. So we're going to test these radar detectors on 5 courses. And I'll start each one with an overview like this, showing the course with the location and orientation of the radar. And then after each test, you'll see these images again with a graphic overlaid on them depicting the results. Here we have the course for test number 1, and we'll start filming about half a mile away from where the radar is located, along this very curvy stretch of road with some hills and trees along both sides. All of the radar detectors will be set to highway mode in all of the tests. And we'll start with the Uniden R8. Note that we get the first alert at this intersection with the street sign on the left. If you're worried about the placement on the dash, I found that differences are negligible, if any, to mounting them higher, and I might try to do a demonstration of this in a separate video. We just came into the line of sight of the radar up ahead. And the radar is at the end of this guardrail on the left. Now this is the Escort Max 360 Mark II. Here's the intersection with the sign on the left. And the first alert of the Escort Max 360 Mark II. Line of sight to the radar. And the radar is at the end of this guardrail on the left. This is the Cobra Rad 700i. Here's the intersection on the left with the sign. And just past this intersection on the right, we'll get the first alert on the Cobra. Line of sight to the radar. And the radar is at the end of this guardrail on the left. Finally, here's the old Escort Solo S3. Intersection on the left where the R8 and the Max 360 Mark II first alerted. This is where the Cobra Rad 700i first alerted. The first alert with this one is very close to the line of sight to the radar. And the radar is at the end of this guardrail on the left. Here are the results of test number 1. For test number 2, we're going to use the same course, but we're going to move the radar to the opposite side of the road, and the results will start to get a little more interesting. We'll start again with the Uniden R8. This is the intersection where the detectors gave first alerts in the previous test. And again, the Uniden R8 alerts in the same general area just beyond this intersection. The line of sight is pretty close to the radar gun in this test. The radar is located here to the right. Here we have the Escort Max 360 Mark II. Here's the intersection where we got first alerts in the previous test. But the Max 360 Mark II took a little bit longer with this setup. Here we have line of sight to the radar. And here we pass the radar on the right side. Let's see how the Cobra Rad 700i does. Again, here's the intersection where we got alerts last time. This is where the Escort Max 360 Mark II started chiming in. And finally we get our first alert, but we're still about 10 seconds away from line of sight to the radar at about 45 miles an hour. Line of sight to the radar. And passing the radar on the right side. Let's see how the old Escort Solo S3 does. There's the first alert, and we're about 6 seconds away from line of sight to the radar at 45 miles an hour. Here's line of sight. And here's the radar on the right. And the results of this test were quite different from those of test number 1. Next, we're going to see how these detectors do when we stretch out the course a little bit. We'll start about 1.5 miles away from where the radar is set up around a sharp curve. The road winds through a river valley surrounded by hills, and again, all of the radar detectors are set to highway mode on all of these courses. Here we go with the Uniden R8, and surprisingly it starts chirping some preliminary alerts already. We're a little less than 1.5 miles away from the radar at this point. And then it stops as we swing into the inside of this curve. And I wanted to pause it here at this curve sign because this is where the rest of the videos on this test will start, as none of the other detectors gave any alerts up to this point. Okay, we start getting alerts again, and I wanted to pause to make note of the mile marker sign on the right, as this will come up again and again. Again, the alerts stop on the inside of this curve. And we're back to getting alerts, and I wanted to pause to make note of the house on the left, as this will come into play again and again also. We just came into the direct line of sight to the radar, which is just past this building on the left. And the radar is located just beside that pile of gravel on the left. Okay, here is the Escort Max 360 Mark II, and we're starting at that curve sign that I pointed out before. And we get our first alert at the mile marker sign where the Uniden R8 was also triggered. And again, we lose the signal going through the inside of the curve. And like the R8, it picks up again at the house on the left where we paused before. We just came into the direct line of sight to the radar, which is just past this building on the left. And the radar is located just beside that pile of gravel on the left. Here's the Cobra Rad 700i, again starting at the curve sign. Here we are at the mile marker sign on the right, and notice we're still getting silence at this point. Here's that house on the left, and we'll be getting our first alerts from the Cobra Rad 700. We just came into the direct line of sight to the radar, which is just past this building on the left. And the radar is located just beside that pile of gravel on the left. And finally, the old Escort Solo S3. And we're starting again at the curve sign, but spoiler alert, it might be a while before we start hearing any tones. Here's the mile marker sign on the right. Here's the house on the left where all the others have been alerting. Finally, we start getting an alert. That line of sight to the radar comes up pretty quick. And the radar is located just beside that pile of gravel on the left. So here is the overhead view again with the graphics showing the alert zones of the different detectors. This is test number 4, and this time we'll start about a half a mile away from the radar, which is set up along a stretch of heavily wooded road on both sides and multiple curves. We'll start with the Uniden R8, and this course starts on a pretty sizable hill as we round this first curve. And notice we'll get our first ping at this intersection just before the yellow narrow bridge sign. Just past the bridge, we come into the line of sight to the stationary radar. And the radar is located just to the right of this gate with the reflectors on it. Here's the Escort Max 360 Mark II. And once again, we start getting pings right at this intersection just before the yellow sign. Line of sight to the radar. And the radar is just behind these reflectors. Now the Cobra Rad 700i. It also starts alerting at this intersection just before the sign. Line of sight to the radar. And there's the radar to the right. And finally, the old Escort Solo S3. Here's the intersection where all the others have alerted. And the first alert happens about 8 seconds before we hit the line of sight to the radar. There's line of sight. And the radar is to the right behind those reflectors. So they all performed about the same with the exception of the old S3. I think the trees absorbed a lot of the radar and therefore there wasn't a lot of reflections for the detectors to pick up. Next we'll look at a similar scenario with hills and curves. We'll be traveling from the right side of the screen to the left in this test. Starting again with a Uniden R8. So we're starting off on a pretty big hill here approaching this intersection coming up. And we get our first alert just as we approach the intersection. Here's the intersection. And here's line of sight to the radar just before the speed limit sign. And there's the radar on the right. Here's the Escort Max 360 Mark II. And we have our first ping just as we cross the intersection. There's line of sight to the radar. And the radar is located on the right. Now here's the Cobra Rad 700i. Here's the intersection. And we get our first alert just past the intersection. Line of sight to the radar. The radar on the right side of the road. Now for the old Escort Solo S3. Here's the intersection where all the others have alerted. We get our first alert about 8 seconds away from the line of sight to the radar. There's line of sight to the radar. The location of the radar on the right. These perform similarly as well, and I think they would have done better if it weren't for the hill leading up to that intersection where we first got alerts. It was a bigger hill than it appeared in the video. At this point, I'll cycle through the final results from each test once again, and then I'll show some close-up video clips of each radar detector so that you can get a closer look. I'll also try to add some commentary about my experiences with these units in the video description. Here's a close-up of the Cobra Rad 700i, which retails for about $250. Here's the Escort Max 360 Mark II, which retails for about $500 to $550. Here's the Uniden R8, which retails for about $699. I also want to note that the two buttons on the front are backlit, but I had that feature turned off. And finally, the old Escort Solo S3, which was first introduced in 2011 and runs on two AA batteries.